I want to share with you some information that I will guarantee you never heard before relating to your liver. Now, I'm going to go through two of the signs of a fatty liver first, and then I want to explain something before I get to the third one. But the first symptom or sign of a fatty liver is there is no symptoms, there is no signs. You have virtually no indication that you have a fatty liver. Okay, that's the first one, which is kind of like not really a symptom, but it's something you should know. So many people have a fatty liver. In fact, 30% of all overweight children have a fatty liver, okay? And 40% of the entire population have a fatty liver. And the great majority of them don't have a clue because there are no symptoms. Now, the second most common symptom or sign that you have a fatty liver is that your midsection is protruding. So if you look down right now at your abdomen, does it stick out? Okay, you could have a fatty liver. Now, this next part is very, very interesting. So if you checked out, just check back in right now and really hear what I'm going to say, because the good news is the liver is the only organ that you have that you can get 100% repair and regeneration by volume and size. All the other organs, the pancreas, the kidney, your lungs, you don't get 100% repair. But the liver, you can. But there is a point of no return, which I'm going to explain next. So normally, you have a fat cell that over a period of time, if you eat too much or the wrong foods, it starts to expand, right? It gets to a point where there's a limitation of expansion. Your fat cells do not have an unlimited capacity to expand. At some point, they hit their limit. What happens next is the fat cell becomes dysfunctional. In other words, it starts to lose blood supply. It starts to become inflamed. You start developing fibrosis and scar tissue around the fat cells, and they can no longer take in fat. So where does that fat go if you maintain your lifestyle the way it's going? Well, it goes outside the fat cell. It starts to getting stored outside the fat cell. That's called ectopic fat. And I'm talking about in the muscles, not in fat cells, just around the pancreatic cells in the pancreas, around the heart cells, around your kidneys, okay? And there is a huge area that your body can dump this fat in around the organs in your abdominal cavity. You can hold 4 to 6 liters of this ectopic fat very easily in your abdomen, but that's only the start, because that abdomen can start to expand outward more and more and more to the point where you can hold more of this ectopic fat, okay? Now, the majority of fat in someone's liver is this type of fat. It's ectopic. It's not even in the fat cell. This type of fat is not a good, healthy fat. This type of fat creates insulin resistance. Now, this next thing I'm going to tell you is something I didn't really fully know and understand until very recently, okay? So this is new information. I talked about the liver being ectopic fat, but I didn't tell you where the source of that ectopic fat is really coming from in the liver. There's 3 sources. Just under 60%, it's 59% of the fat in your liver, actually originates from fat outside your liver. It's from fat in other parts of your body that end up in the liver. 60%. Wow, that's crazy. So how can that happen? Well, like I said before, this fat becomes damaged. You can no longer hold fat. So you start getting a breakdown of that fat, and it starts to leach out through into the bloodstream, and it ends up in the liver, okay? So a lot of the fat that you have in your liver is come from other places in your body, which is interesting. So that's 59%. 26% of the fat in the liver actually comes from your liver making its own fat from glucose. And so there's a process called gluconeogenesis. That is the production of new sugar. This has nothing to do with eating sugar. It just has to do with your liver making sugar from non-carbohydrate sources. Now, insulin is supposed to inhibit or stop that process from happening. Normally, insulin's like, okay, liver, you can't make any more fat. But because of all this dysfunctional fat and the insulin resistance, now you have a deficiency of insulin in the cells. That's causing this uncontrolled gluconeogenesis in the liver. So your liver is just making tons and tons of sugar. And this happens in diabetes, prediabetes, in insulin resistance. And you'll see like diabetics will wake up in the morning with the dawn phenomena where all of a sudden they have high sugar. But sometimes if they're on the ketogenic diet, they're not eating any sugar. Where is that sugar coming from? It's coming from the liver making all this sugar because of all this dysfunctional fat and the insulin resistance. Okay, because there's an insufficient amount of insulin there to suppress this process from happening. But of course, in the blood, you have this massive amount of insulin. But in cells, you have a deficiency of insulin. So we have this severe imbalance. And the third source of actual fat comes from dietary fat, but that's because you're also consuming sugar at the same time. How can I make this even more simple? Well, when you consume a diet that's very high in fructose or glucose or refined carbohydrates that turn into glucose, you're going to create a situation where the fat cells get overwhelmed and they get to a point where they can't take in any more fat. It's going to spill off into around the organs, in your liver, in your abdominal cavity. You're going to develop insulin resistance. But if you check your blood sugar, it'll be normal for a while, okay? Because everything is compensating. But if you check the insulin, it'd be screaming high, but doctors don't check the insulin. But if you check the blood sugars, it'll be normal for a while, for about 10 to 15 years. And then little cells of the pancreas are just exhausted. Now they can't make enough insulin, and now we get a much lowered amount of insulin. There's nothing to buffer these blood sugars, so now the blood sugar starts going higher and higher and higher, and you have what's called diabetes, okay? And they always say a fatty liver is associated with, diabetes and metabolic syndrome and high blood pressure, but I think now you can really see the source and what's really cause and what's the effect of this, right? You have the diet that is too darn high in carbs that is actually creating this insulin resistance, and it's damaging the fat cell, and it's a self-defeating circle and cycle, and one thing worsens another and the whole thing gets out of control. But at the very heart of this problem is the person's consuming too many carbohydrates. Now, how do we know that is at the source of it? Well, very simply, if you get someone on a low carb diet, okay, what's going to happen is you start correcting all of this. You start getting rid of the fat off the liver very quickly. Within 2 weeks, you can drop 50% of that fat off the liver if you do the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting. So dropping the carbs is going to be very, very, very important. Now remember, the liver is the only cell that can completely 100% regenerate. It takes a beating, it can rejuvenate, but there is a point of limitation. If you have too much scar tissue in there, then there's going to be a limitation of how much you can get back. But realize that we have the dietary sugar, that's creating a lot of problems, but we also have dysfunctional fat cells throughout your body that's ending up creating fat in the liver. And we're also having the liver that's dysfunctional and it's making all this extra sugar because there's no insulin to suppress it. Okay. But in your blood, you got tons of insulin. All of that can be corrected if you start to cut down the carbs. Now, you should also know that the third symptom or sign that you have a fatty liver is insulin resistance. There's quite a few additional things to know that you have insulin resistance, but the real big one is you cannot go for a long period of time without needing food. If you can go a long period of time very easily without food, then chances are your insulin resistance is much less of a problem, okay? And you will see as you start to lower your carbs and you start to fast, it becomes easier and easier and easier. That is one of the best indications that you are correcting insulin resistance, okay? So one way to know if you still have insulin resistance is, can you fast for a long period of time? But also if you can wake up in the morning without having high blood glucose. All right, so cravings, can't go very long without needing food. Fatigue, I already mentioned that. Frequent urination at night, okay? If you have to get up at night to urinate, chances are you have insulin resistance. And if you fix insulin resistance, you can fix this frequent urination problem. Also, feeling tired after lunch is a common symptom. Once you fix this, your energy will improve after lunch and throughout the day, and you'll have less brain fog. Vision problems is another indication that you have insulin resistance. You may think you're just getting old and you need glasses, but chances are it could be just your blood sugar situation. So the 3 simple things that you need to do is get on the healthy version of the ketogenic diet with intermittent fasting. Okay, that's the most important thing. Number 2, start exercising. Exercise, regular, consistent exercise will improve insulin resistance very potently. And the third thing, to start consuming apple cider vinegar, like 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar in your water a few times a day. Apple cider vinegar could do a lot for your digestion, but it can very potently improve your blood sugars. Now that you know this interesting association between liver fat and insulin resistance, you should check out this video that gives you the complete knowledge on insulin resistance. And I put it up right here.